The Persona 4 Arena series is one which has traditionally taken a backseat to other Arc System Works mainstay titles, predominantly the Guilty Gear and BlazBlue franchises respectively. Although the series had a respectable competitive run from 2012 to 2016, it was never truly recognized by the wider circles in the FGC, and was even perceived by some as an inferior version of a fighting game title than what Arc System Works traditionally was known for developing. However, despite being overshadowed in an era that had giants such as Ultra Street Fighter 4, Mortal Kombat 9, The King of Fighters 13, and Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 drawing the majority of the headlines in the fighting game community, on the evening of July 12, 2013, a somewhat mysterious figure only known by the alias Yume delivered one of the most impressive performances on the EVO Grand stage the FGC had witnessed to that point. Yume, shortened for Yuminori, is a player who is clouded by a fair amount of mystery as there are not many details known of his origin or his public persona, something quite uncharacteristic for a player of his skill level. However, throughout the years, there have been a few pieces of information that painted a clearer picture of who Yume actually is. Originally known as a top Bridget player during the Guilty Gear XX days, Yume was renowned for his skill in multiple different games, some of which include Capcom vs. SNK 2, Melty Blood Act Cadenza, and later BlazBlue Calamity Trigger. Yume was especially famous for being an extremely effective player at using high-skill characters which require precise execution and dexterity. Yume was seen participating in multiple games in various years at then one of the most prestigious annual Japanese fighting game tournament series, Togeki Super Battle Opera, or what was simply better known as SBO. Throughout the year leading up to the Grand Tournament, he saw himself taking first place at qualifier events which included top finishes at games such as Aquapaza, BlazBlue, and later Persona 4 Arena. In the arcade scene, Yume was known as a player who did not like to have many of his archives recorded for unknown reasons. Some speculate it was due to being able to scout his gameplay tendencies and perhaps being studied for at larger tournaments. However, this theory was never truly confirmed. During his time competing in Persona 4 Arena, Yume established himself as the #1 player in Japan as he achieved the highest rank as well as the top PSR in the arcade version of the game, and was known to rack up win streaks that climbed to over 80 games in a row, with very few players pushing him to defeat. However, while Yume was known in smaller circles in Japan, with Persona 4 Arena being a newly established property and not a legacy title, the West did not know much about him or his accolades, and what became even more so evident, they were vastly unprepared to face him in tournament settings. EVO 2013 saw participation from some of the most celebrated fighting game players in the world, some which included Daigo Umehara, Infiltration, Cien, Tokido, Mad KOF, Kazunoko, and many others, though none of those celebrated players arguably had a more impressive showing than Yume's championship performance during the Persona 4 Arena stretch of the tournament. In a tournament that featured over 400 players, some of which included top-level talent such as Tokido, Kazunoko, Breaker Dave, Bananaken, Daichan, Lord Knight, and many others, Yume would go on to separate himself from the pack by dominating his competition, going 10-0 overall, all the while never dropping a single game during pools, semifinals, or the top 8. However, the winning record alone, albeit extremely impressive, was only further emphasized by Yume's spectacular high-level performance in which he completely demolished other top-level competition. The most memorable moments, however, came during the top 8 final. The first was Yume's winner's semifinal match versus Stunnage, a highly touted Yukiko player from Japan. The match began as per usual in most of Yume's matches, as he found himself dominating the first round. However, after dropping the second round to Stunnage, Yume returned to absolute vintage form by not only achieving a perfect round, but baiting out Stunnage to mistakenly burst and taking away any chance for him to win the match.
So much a mix-up until he activates their gear. He's just starting to build it back. Yeah, he's just starting the pressure. Oh, bad burst. Tragic burst by Stunnage. Absolutely gonna die for that.
The second memorable moment came by way of the winner's finals match against arguably the best Persona 4 Arena player in the US at the time, Lord Knight. However, it was quickly noticed in the eyes of everyone that there are levels to being the best, and Yume's absolute masterpiece versus Lord Knight further proved that realization. In the opening round, Yume had already established his experience by quickly breaking a throw attempt from Lord Knight after an intentionally ambiguous drop combo for a reset. Soon after that sequence, Yume proceeded to bully Lord Knight with constant pressure, eventually baiting his attempted use of a guard cancel to win the first round.
Such a good bait. The guard cancel, an option out of defense. It's like an alpha counter, and Yume just crushed it by blocking it. All right, cross it up. Oh, nice.
However, by far the most memorable moment, which came shortly after, was Yume's adaptation to overheating his character, Aegis, which in theory put himself in a disadvantageous position. However, Yume did not operate in theory as he operated in reality, and the reality that ensued was his continued domination of Lord Knight despite the overheated character, eventually pushing him to the brink and yet again taking away his last chance to survive by baiting his burst in midair.
Look at the Orgia horse. He has no Orgia. He still bursts, trying to replenish his Orgia. But this is a terrible spot that Lord Knight has put Yume in. And he just runs with it. No Orgia. Aegis mix up. I have never seen an Aegis so competent with no Orgia. Alright, try to feel it out. Alright. Oh, goes for the LK special double overhead. No good. Doesn't get the second one. We're gonna see. Oh, that cross up. Oh, in the first phase. Oh my god. This should be it for Lord Knight.
After defeating Lord Knight in Winners Finals, Yume would then go on to overwhelm him once again in Grand Finals after Lord Knight's climb from the loser's bracket. However, the task revealed itself to be too tall once again, as Yume went on to win 3 games straight to be crowned the first ever Persona 4 Arena champion at Evolution. Upon a successful trip to the United States with a trophy in hand, Yume returned to Japan with even more proof that he is in fact the best in the world. The final appearance of consequence with Yume competing in Persona 4 Arena came in late 2013, as he took first place at God's Garden number 9, defeating other top Japanese players in the process. However, Yume's run would end there, as the release of Persona 4 Arena's sequel, Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, was set to come to Japanese arcades in late November of 2013. It was made known that Yume would not be competing in the game in the same capacity, as he was hired by Arc System Works as a battle planner for the game, therefore being directly involved in the production of the game through its console release. As unfortunate as it was, fans would never witness Yume competing against other high-level competitors in Persona 4 Arena Ultimax. The sequel was home again to top-level competitors, some of which included Japanese legacy Guilty Gear player Koichi, outstanding rising talents in Tahichi and Aguro, as well as high-level legacy Persona 4 Arena players in Shiki and Soji. Considering his other responsibilities, and his known preference for not having his replay footage archived, Yume's few competitive appearances in Persona 4 Arena Ultimax came by way of casual matches seen in arcades of him using both his previous main character in Aegis, as well as new-coming Ultimax character Marie. However, those appearances came many years after the game's competitive peak had passed. Although he had a short time in the spotlight, it was certainly a memorable time. Yume can be seen as a final boss in a video game, which does not appear a second time after defeating the player. He came, he saw, and he most definitely conquered. While his time at the top was short-lived, his run was arguably one of the most impressive ones the FGC had ever witnessed, as he forever cemented himself as the king who was never dethroned.
楽しいゲームなんでみんなぜひやってください。お願いします。